Understanding the real problem is the second key point. So here's a student for you. A male, 8 years old, he seems kind of scattered and impulsive. He forgets a lot of what he hears when teachers ask the student to get organized. He fools around in class. He's unable to predict the next sequence of tasks. He doesn't reflect on his behaviors. His older brother has many of the same symptoms, and they both came from poverty. The teacher's pretty sure that he has what? What would you fill in the blanks? Like, what's your diagnosis? Go ahead, write down your answer, or if you're with another person, share your answer. So many teachers would have written down ADHD or ADD. What you should know is that for a lot of students who have these kinds of symptoms, it's really important to remember that it's easy to label someone, but unless you actually are a medical doctor or a psychiatrist, you might get surprised by it. Here you're looking at a healthy version of the brain. Actually, this is my own brain scan, and you're seeing 4 different views of it. The bottom is in the upper left-hand corner, and then the right hemisphere is in the top right, left hemisphere, lower left, and then the top of the brain in the right. Here's what you should know. This brain looks like it's pretty healthy because smooth surface shows even activation and the brain is humming along. Now check out the same brain when they are stressing me out like crazy. What you now see is my brain doesn't look so good. This is actually very similar to what you'd see in a student who has serious ADHD. But what I'm telling you is all of this happened from stress. So let's go back to the student we introduced. Possibilities for this student include if he grew up poor, it means greater likelihood of increased chronic stress disorders. Stress disorders mimic the exact same symptoms of ADHD, impulsivity, poor memory, and achronica, which is a Greek word for mean out of sync with time. But as long as he keeps being labeled as ADHD, he'll never get the interventions that he needs. Now, second thing, let's try another student. This guy is 15 years old. He's acting out a lot in school, behavior problems. His grades have dropped in the last year. He seems angry, depressed. Several times he's lashed out at teachers for small things. Not doing homework anymore. Some teachers think he maybe is oppositional. Others think it's ADHD. Motivation is gone. Write down in your notes, what do you think might be going on with this student? All right, let's check in. First thing you should know is that things like this are a serious flag, a serious signal. What the information suggested is that this started recently. It happened within the last year or so. So something happened. What could have happened in his brain? Well, let's check in. If there was any type of a head injury, what you're looking at is a top-down view of tissue. And at the top right, you'll see a blow-up of smooth tissue. These are the axons that come out from the cell bodies. That's the outbound signaling. And at the top, you see it torn, like you'll see these gaps at the top right compared to at the bottom where it's not torn. What's the relevance of this? When someone gets a concussion or head injury or brain trauma, there's usually tearing in the brain, and the tearing compromises the cognitive and emotional systems. When you scan the brain, you might see this type of differences in the brain when we're looking using a SPECT scan, which is single positron emitted computed tomography, which is more of a generalized view of brain activity. You'll see brain trauma injuries looking like this, or in this case, a student who literally fell out of a tree when he was very young you see a big hole in the brain where there's no activity right there. These are the kinds of things you have to consider even though you can't see them. So when we go to possibilities, one possibility for this student is, with the symptoms we see, is maybe the boy's father left the marriage. You'll get a different effect if the boy's father left the marriage than the mother. Or the father may have been hospitalized long-term or was killed. In other words, huge male absence. The boy is depressed and in grieving. Middle case, maybe he moved away from where he had a close-knit relationship, close friends. Maybe he lost his girlfriend over the move. Or finally, the boy experienced a kind of physical trauma. Unless you build the relationships with students, you'll never get them to tell you what went on. Almost guaranteed these would be one of my top three. Almost guaranteed. Like 90% chance it's one of these three. So let's check out one more. What's the real problem? A girl's 7 years old. She reads a paragraph. And the teacher asks her what she read. She has no idea. Teacher responds, read it again, but this time I want you to pay attention. Later, when the teacher gives the same student two numbers to calculate in her head mentally, like here's 4, now multiply that by 5. This girl's unable to do it, in spite of being taught it over and over. The teacher repeats the task and tells the girl to pay attention this time. Go ahead and write down what you think is the problem. Now let's check out some possibilities. First thing on my list is that we can tell she's paying attention, but the highest likelihood that I would predict is she has terrible working memory. In other words, stuff goes in her head and it falls out of her head. It could have happened from a traumatic brain injury, TBI, but it could also be that she's grown up in poverty and is experiencing chronic stress. Those two would be my highest likelihood working memory. So here's what this is about. Before you decide what's wrong with a student, you build relationship. The second thing you have to do is understand what the real problem is. Many times kids get moved on year after year, kicked down the road because what happens is teachers misdiagnose. They misdiagnose. Why? Because they get a cookie cutter and they want every student to fit that cookie cutter. Watch how they cope with classroom assignments. Check details from not one but multiple test scores. You want to find out, did their test scores suddenly change, or they eroded over time, or were they low from the get-go? Listen to stories about his or her last 10 years. Have they moved a lot? Are they in a military family? Was there a family trauma? Was there losses? Are they growing up in poverty? Until you get the real story, you'll never be able to solve the student's struggling issues. Please put a big star by this. This is an important piece of the puzzle. In other words, make sure you go after the real problem.